Um, as Eric said, I'm Jackson, co-staff of this project. Been You've been hearing from me all 2 days, and I'm excited to introduce our kind of like part two of parallel institutions of public power. Um, we did a one panel on this topic yesterday and another one today to hear from a couple fascinating folks, fascinating projects. Mike Foley from Cuyahoga County, who actually interviewed as part of this project, and Pete Wywitty from Reclaim Our Power out in California, that was not interviewed as part of this Midwest project, but is bringing some very interesting thinking about statewide utility takeovers, which we also heard a little bit about in other panels. So we're going to sort of keep exploring this, and I just want to say, just as both like reflection and framing here, there has been, I think, in the fights to expand and improve public power, I think that a lot of what I've experienced in the past has been a lot of like silver bullet thinking, like it's either this or it's that, right? There's only one way to move this forward, and it either works or it doesn't. And I think that this entire day and a half has really reinforced for me that we need a diversity of strategies all moving together towards a future that puts social goals, community interests, justice, and equity first. So I'm really excited to bring these folks into the conversation. And I'm going to start just by asking you to introduce yourselves and just quickly share your name, the organization you're working for, and just share that first. And Pete, I'll kick it to you to start us off.
Great. Thank you, Jackson. And thank you, everybody, for spending time in what's been a really rich conversation for what I've been able to join for my West Coast time zone. So I didn't catch the morning sessions today, but my name is Pete Wywitty. I am an organizer with the Reclaim Our Power Utility Justice Campaign, and I'm based in Ohlone Territory in Oakland, California. I'll say more about what Reclaim Our Power is in a second, or I'll leave it there unless you want me to expand.
Leave it there for now, Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Foley. I'm the sustainability director for Cuyahoga County. So Cuyahoga County in Ohio, on Lake Erie. Cleveland is the major city. So we surround Cleveland, about 1.2 million people, 59 separate communities. And we have created our own county utility in that, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes.
Awesome. So I'm gonna ask both of you first to just kind of like background how you came to be working on public power in the context you are. And Pete, I'm gonna start with you. I'm asking you to tell us a little bit about the wildfires, the service failures of PG&E, the equity and justice failures of PG&E on many fronts that led to developing the idea for Golden State Energy, and this sort of vision of state level utility. So just kind of bring folks into the story and the arc that brought you to this focus and this work.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jackson. I imagine, were we in a room together asking everybody to raise their hand if they've heard of PG&E, or what comes to mind when you think of PG&E? You probably aren't thinking about justice and equitable delivery of energy and safety and health. So PG&E, founded on stolen land 120 so years ago. Long history of the largest utility in the country, stretching from Bakersfield up to the Oregon border. So basically everything north of the Central California. I'll spare some of the details, but we'll touch on some of how Reclaim Our Power came about and what we're demanding. 2010 massive explosion in San Bruno kills 8 people from a PG&E failure. Several fires throughout the mid 2010s. 2017, some of the largest fires in Sonoma County, 22 people killed, including needing to evacuate my partner's mom and a family. And then 2018, the Camp Fire that killed 84 people in the middle of the night. A broken sea hook that was timed out when it was installed at about 50 years worth of life, and it was at 110 years old when it broke. Fire caught. The community was poorly warned, and the entire city of Paradise was wiped off the map. And so out of that, a number of us started organizing and recognizing, just sort of looking for where is the blame and what can change. And we built a coalition of the folks most impacted by the failures of the energy system, including fire survivors, not just homeowners, but migrant folks, farm workers, et cetera, as well as folks with disabilities, folks who are most impacted when the power shuts off, and other folks in environmental justice communities, local energy experts, and some progressive labor groups to envision both how do we stop this monstrosity from happening again, and what can we replace it with, block the bad and build the new, as folks in movement generation lead us to consistently. And so we started moving towards articulating what could be different. There was this magic moment where PG&E went into bankruptcy in 2019, and the doors were open. The possibility of something else arrived, and there were propositions as community-owned, like state-owned models. They were break it all up into multiple munis all over the place. There was a consumer co-op model. Many options were on the table. And then that window closed, and the governor, after saying he's letting the courts figure it out, opened other options and saying PG&E will never come back the way it was. He basically handed the keys back to Wall Street and put PG&E back in charge with a couple of small provisions. One that I won't go into this, but put fire survivors as like stockholders in the organization, so forcing them to align themselves with the corporation that had burned down their houses. Two, they created what is probably the first ladder of performance of if PG&E does enough bad stuff, their business license gets revoked, and then their might get taken over. And three, which is relevant to our conversation today, is they created a thing called Golden State Energy, just a two-page piece of legislation passed in the middle of the very dead end of the legislative session as what would be the receiver if PG&E fails again, to backstop and have a state take over the poles and wires and the institution of PG&E. So we've organized for the last several years. I'll stop here and we can come back to it. But we've organized for the last several years to, one, push on and make sure that folks know that how bad PG&E is, and approach that big red button of being able to, yes, they are bad enough that they should trip the wire and reject their business license, but also imagine and build out, okay, this is a backstop that doesn't have staffing, doesn't have much state resources behind it. Let's imagine what it would be like if the most impacted communities, the folks who've been subject to the terrors of this energy system so far, were in control and putting forward what a statewide entity or a Northern California entity would look like. And so that's what we've been driving to do, to define Golden State Energy, both in law and in people's imaginations. So say more soon.
Love it. Thank you for that. I'll remind people to please be dropping, if you have thoughts, questions, ideas, please keep dropping them in the chat as we go. Mike, I want to pass it over to you. So over on West Coast side, there's this big move around a statewide transition responding to this falling apart utility. And you have developed something quite interesting at the county level in response to some of the other limitations surrounding your situation in Cleveland. So tell us about the Cuyahoga County public utility. Tell us about how the history with Cleveland Public Power and First Energy and all the surrounding stuff led to putting this idea forward as a solution.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. Thanks, and thanks you guys for asking me to come on. So I'm Mike Foley, I'm sustainability director. But before I was here, I was in the state legislature for 8 years as a member of the House of Representatives in Ohio. And when we got down there in 2006, 2008, we passed legislation creating this kind of new energy structure for the state of Ohio. It was a little bit more fair in terms of how rates were devised. There was a renewable portfolio standard, so clean energy had to be embedded into the utilities had to buy clean energy and put it into the grid. And there was this kind of schedule about, by the year 2025, we'd have 25% of our electricity as part of the grid portfolio. And so at least, and I come out of I was a tenant organizer and before I was in the legislature and kind of did some environmental stuff. And so this is like kind of this utility legislation that passed seemed like a kind of a decent chunk of legislation to deal with our investor-owned utilities in the state of Ohio. By no means perfect, but it's better than what we had before. When I left I got term limited out in 2014. In 2013, we'd have just this total reversal. First Energy, which was the investor-owned utility, which maybe some of you know because of their scandals right now, had just been able to basically buy the legislature, had reduced everything that was in this legislation, especially in the renewable front, and just taken it away, gutted the climate aspects, the clean energy aspects of our renewable portfolio standard, so then it meant nothing. And so I came out of the legislature really frustrated with the state of Ohio for a lot of reasons. I was a liberal Democrat in a very Republican conservative body, but I was just frustrated with state policy. I came to the county as the sustainability director. We just created this Department of Sustainability, and it was kind of stuff in my wheelhouse, energy and environmental matters. So I applied, I got the job. And, one of the things we just focused on at the beginning was just on energy policy, because Ohio was just so awful and terrible on energy policy that, man, we need to focus and put, clean up the grid as best we can locally. We've created some solar projects. We did this landfill project where we put 35,000 solar panels on a landfill. We're running that electricity into county buildings. We've done rooftop solar, but the infrastructure, the structure of how electricity is still provided to the county and to the city of Cleveland is still roughly the same. First Energy controls most of the lines and the distribution aspects of the utility in Northeast Ohio. Cleveland Public Power is a municipal utility located in the city of Cleveland. But interestingly, they compete with First Energy for customers. So we think we're the largest city in the country where you've got one side of the road is First Energy distribution lines. The other side is Cleveland Public Power distribution lines. And CPP, Cleveland Public Power, has not done a great job of kind of competing well with First Energy. First Energy has been able to actually undercut them in terms of price and in some aspects, reliability. So as we're kind of working through, trying to think through, hey, Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, old Rust Belt, we've got this manufacturing sold to us. We're trying to figure out how do we bring, jobs basically back to the county. Is there a way we can take advantage of potentially this idea about microgrids? There's this whole new idea about, if the grid goes down, we'll be able to keep your power up. And we'd had power outages. The whole East Coast of the United States went out for like a week because of First Energy power outages back in the mid 2000s. So the power outages were an issue that we faced. So we started working with Cleveland Public Power because we knew First Energy would not be helpful with us. We got really close to doing kind of a microgrid district in downtown Cleveland with Cleveland Public Power. At the end of the day, though, they would not pull the trigger with us. And so they saw us as potential competition for their customers. And they've got these really bad power contracts that they just need to sell power to people. And they need as large a base as possible because they've got these take or pay contracts, and they have to take a certain amount of power and pay for that amount of power, whether they use it or not. So they've got to spread that power out. anyway, we couldn't figure this thing out with Cleveland Public Power. We like this idea of microgrids. We like this idea of clean energy and battery systems, putting into a local distribution network, an islanded grid, basically. If the power goes down, we'll keep your power up with clean energy and backup battery systems. So that's kind of the definition of a microgrid. So we figured out that, my gosh, Cuyahoga County is a little unique in the state of Ohio. We're called a charter county, meaning that we've kind of created our own government locally. And out of our charter, we've given ourselves the ability of any municipality in the county, any powers they have under the state constitution. By inference, we have those powers at the county level. So we've kind of taken that inference of municipal power that municipalities have, grabbed onto it at the county level, and we've created our own county utility now. We haven't passed any electrons across wires yet. We're still in the development stage of all that. But we've got in fact, we're right now negotiating a contract with a utility operator, basically, who's going to be operating the utility on our behalf, at least for the short term. But we've now got this construct, this legal construct, where we can be the utility to provide electrons. And at least up front, we're looking at kind of manufacturing larger load systems, because we're scared, at least initially, to kind of look at residential, just the complexities of residential right off the bat. Eventually, I'd love us to get it, residential down the road, but right now, I think we need large load centers and kind of a distribution network that is kind of concentric around these kind of microgrid districts that may be a mile or 2 miles wide. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We think we're a pretty interesting place. We're the first county in the country to form our own county utility in probably 100 years. Probably in the state of Ohio, we're the first real kind of local government to form a utility in maybe 40 or 50 years. We're not going to take over the whole grid right off the bat, eventually, hopefully. But we think we've got this theory about starting off small, expanding, and bringing in, kind of clean energy, tapping into the transmission grid for clean energy off the transmission grid, putting in a lot of local generation, and then doing backup battery systems. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So as y'all can see, these are some pretty visionary, transformative, creative approaches to expanding public power. I want to start, I think, lead in by asking a question about equity. So in terms of in both kind of these service territories, we've already heard a little bit about the issues of equity and service quality being disparate along lines of race, income, number of other social factors that shape kind of who gets good service and who doesn't. And the question I want to put forward to either both of you, whoever wants to jump on it, this question of how do these different approaches offer opportunities to improve upon these equity issues, to create more equitable service, to make sure that ratepayers who are currently being underserved are going to be more properly served in the future?
Well, I'll start off. I mean, so, at least initially, we've kind of got some districts that we're looking at, one in the city of Euclid, one in the city of Brooklyn, suburb of Cleveland, which are low mod income communities. But I do want to say we're starting off in kind of these manufacturing centers, right? So, but the idea is once we get these things off, there are a lot of low income neighborhoods around there. And there's this whole kind of theory of community solar. So we've been kind of talking to advocates. Can we, if we put a whole bunch of solar panels on a manufacturing facility, can we figure out a way that community members who are close by can actually own some of those panels and sell the electrons into to the businesses that are close by? It's a lot of brain damage to figure all that stuff out, and we need someone to do it for us on our behalf almost, because we've got a lot of other brain damage we're working on right now and other things. But I mean, we are really open to that, and in fact, we applaud it. We want to see it happen. So, in terms of equity, I think it's kind of built into our county's DNA. We're a county that is pretty poor compared to most other counties in the country. Kind of old old manufacturing where we've had a lot of people who leave, and with climate change, ironically, people may be moving back to the north from the south. So we may, and we got a whole bunch of fresh water on Lake Erie. So there may be this kind of boomerang effect or climate migration that we're kind of considering. But it's something I think that we've got built into our DNA. We're working with our local trades, our building trades on building these things out. We've got a DEI component of whenever we build a project that will be diversity, equity, and inclusion goals that the county has already embedded in, and other projects will be embedded in these projects as well. So it's not fully baked yet, but it's kind of in the DNA, I think, of how we're thinking about these things.
Yeah, really exciting projects, Mike. And I appreciate the question. That our approach to the work is centered on equity, centered on justice. Justice is the goal, but energy is the tool. And we again, we have the benefit and curse of sitting sort of in the seat of empire. That when you look at all the outcomes for low-income folks, for Black, Indigenous, people of color under PG&E's reign, it's hard to do worse. And so just transferring the profit incentive out of this Wall Street corporation that's been propped up by cowardly elected leadership has really doubled down on the way that they spend their money and the metrics that they're paying attention to. And so if and when Golden State Energy comes into being, simply switching those is going to have a tremendous impact on folks that we work with. So what if we, instead of having we had things called public safety power shutoffs. Some of our friends call them, they call them PSPS, we call them PSBS, because they're usually decided by the corporation. A couple of folks with MBAs sitting in a Wall Street office deciding to shut off the power to hundreds of thousands of people. What if we change the calculus of how that happens when there's a wind event or something that is more likely to spur fires with the dilapidated equipment? It's done, and as a kind of like, we can't afford the liability, so we're going to turn off folks' power instead. What if we had decision-making structures in place at the local level and as an interconnected region-wide level, where folks were able to decide, no, we're not going to shut off in this way, or we are, but we're going to put in these provisions to take care of the folks most impacted. Rates is just an absolute, a lot of what's happening in California is we're sort of the most expensive power in the country, and moving towards a reliability at all costs emphasis, where all of the money that is going into expanding the system is about keeping the lights on for every person at all times as the region gets hotter and hotter, and not putting enough resources into local reliability infrastructure on the ground level for low-income communities, for folks and what that often means is putting diesel plants in places like East Oakland or East Palo Alto or other low-income Black and brown communities to keep the lights on for everybody, or keep the six big screen TVs on for folks in wealthier communities, but poisoning the lungs of Black and brown folks who did not decide to put those energy systems there. And given the decision, they would have done something else. Our folks would have done something else. So it is easy to imagine doing better than PG&E, but we don't want to just scrape off the letters of the big buildings and put Golden State Energy where PG&E used to be, even though just getting Wall Street out and putting it in state hands would be a huge step forward. We also know that connected to all of these questions of equity and public health are the decision points in people's lives where they're able to touch and feel and interact with how they interact with power. And so I'll speak very quickly about microgrids and then hand it back to you, Jackson. I was excited to hear Mike mentioning microgrids. We have a project that a cohort of organizations, Black and Brown and frontline led organizations that are working in building tangible projects in their communities, that building microgrids. There's a community center in Chinatown in Oakland, and there's a queer Black and Brown led land project in Sonoma County, and high school in East Oakland. These are all groups that we're working with to build out their capacity and understanding of how the system works and be able to control their own power, but also is designed to poke a hole in PG&E and the current system that does not allow projects like that, multi parcel projects like that to move forward. So we're sort of calling on the carpet by both building the capacity of our folks and the folks who are most impacted by the system, but also stepping right to the folks who control the system and say, try and stop us, like try and shut this down and tell us that we can't own our own energy. Let's have that fight in public and see where decision makers and the public will land. So.
Okay.
Thank you. I actually I want to stick with Golden State Energy for a minute. So I also am aware, right, that Reclaim Our Power kind of like there is this statewide vision. There's also some like local mobilization in different places, right? And I know that y'all have some involvement with this. The city of San Francisco is exploring like municipalization kind of in its own right. And so I want to just like ask a little bit of like, what's the relationship between the statewide vision and sort of communities like San Francisco that are responding to the same conditions and saying kind of, we want out from the situation. So want to just like share a little bit more about like, what's the vision of the institutional relationships there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and a nuanced one, an exciting one, but a nuanced one. We have the benefit of having cities like San Francisco that recognize what's going on and know that they can provide safer, cheaper, cleaner, and more democratic energy than PG&E is providing. And so the city of San Francisco is moving forward with the municipalization plan. If we have time, I'll talk about San Jose and Fresno and these other cities that are putting forward other ideas of how to get out of the current terrible paradigm. However, and we certainly support those efforts towards folks owning their own energy in their local communities. And, however, given the structure of what PG&E is and the concentration of wealth and political power, and to be blunt, progressive political power, a willingness towards public ownership and focus on equity, et cetera. We know that if San Francisco successfully moves forward alone and just sort of takes their ball and goes home, that will take with it a great deal of resources and oomph. And the folks who are most impacted by fires, who are in lower income communities and in rural areas and less progressive areas that are not as politically suited to take on a piece like this, will be left a little bit out to dry, and rates will probably go up. Infrastructure capacity will go down, and sort of a stranded feeling of folks across the state. So we've been working closely with the folks in San Francisco and are very good. We're actually this week going to pass a resolution with them, the Our Power, Our City campaign, in parallel to our work. And sort of, again, pushing towards the governor and the statewide decision makers, like, we can't do this alone. This is a region-wide problem, and we all need to move together. And what we want to build is the sort of the distributor of last resort, where everybody in the state has a certain guaranteed baseline of access to reliability, to clean, affordable power. And places like San Francisco that have the physical infrastructure, the political infrastructure to build a municipal system on top of that can and should, and the system can benefit that. So folks can stay interconnected, and San Francisco doesn't have to secede fully and have to manage alone their inputs and outputs of power. It's an exciting dance and a challenging one, but we also know that like PG&E is watching very closely, and they know once San Francisco pulls the plug that the project in San Jose is we're less excited about, but it's Google essentially trying to build their own transmission line to get more power that they'll privately hold, and they'll construct it as a kind of municipal entity that the city owns, but is really serving just the largest consumers like Google and some of the other tech folks. Fresno is in a process of trying to develop an alternative, even though the politics there are quite different than where I live. And but it makes for interesting bedfellows where city by city, folks are recognizing that this cannot happen. PG&E cannot continue as is. And if we just do it one off, then not only will we have less resources at our disposal as the single city, but the rest of the state will be stuck in a bit of a tough challenge. So we're actually organizing in all of those cities I mentioned and many others to sort of, starting with Friday, we'll pass this resolution in San Francisco saying, dear state, don't let this is happening, get on board, and then having other cities join the choir to say what we need is a mosaic, a connected mosaic across the state, not a kind of like contested relationship of folks pulling out here and there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I think like really trying to like weave together, right? Like we've talked about these sort of campaigns existing at many different scales across many different regions of the country. And I think like what you're talking about, just kind of tracking to some of the conversations earlier today, is starting to weave together, like at a practical level, how do local campaigns and more regional or even national visions begin to strategically align? As I'm going to lift up how like Sean was raising about how the Chicago municipalization effort is even connecting to sort of federal, federal proposals around expanding public power. I want to just shifting back to Ohio. Mike, I kind of want to ask, like, we had, Dan Gray was here earlier talking about the efforts to basically take the some new shifts in leadership in Cleveland and begin to sort of try to address some of the historic challenges with Cleveland public power. And I'm just curious, kind of like, in a similar manner, like, to what extent is there like, would sort of advances and changes in CPP aid and sort of interact with the sort of like microgridding and building out vision that you have for the county?
Yeah, so it's, it has been at least a little bit unfortunate. We have not had this great relationship so far with Cleveland Public Power. They do have a new mayor, and I think they're kind of thinking through how do they how do they build out Cleveland Public Power or use it? Because it's kind of been one of Cleveland's greatest sins, is it's just fallen apart over the years. And so I think kind of new leadership hopefully trying to think through, all right, how do we operate or utilize it for the county? So we don't have any authority right now to operate inside the city. Our ordinance that created this said we have to get authority from the city we're operating in, like some sort of franchise abilities within the city. So we don't have one with Cleveland yet. And I really want one because they've got some substations that I really want to get access to. So they've got substations that they own that get access to the transmission grid. And while First Energy owns a bunch of substations as well, and they have to give us access to the transmission grid by Federal Energy Regulatory Commission rules, they're just not going to be easy to work with. In fact, we imagine they're going to slowball us every chance they get and throw lawsuits. So if we can organize and work with Cleveland Public Power on getting downloading some of that power off the transmission grid through some of their substations, that helps us out. We'll figure it out regardless, but it just makes life easier. But also additionally, Cleveland Public Power doesn't serve the whole city. So they only serve about 2/3 of the city. And as I said, they compete with First Energy inside those 2/3. But there's about 1/3 to 1/4 of the city that they don't serve. And we would, and it's in an area out by our airport that we've got some districts that we would like to develop. In fact, Senator Brown gave us some money. Sherrod Brown, I love Sherrod Brown. He's been wonderful to us. Gave us an earmark just to help study developing a microgrid out by our airport called at NASA, and the airport are out there. So it's called the Arizona area. And so we've got some smart engineers now who are just thinking through, all right, where are transmission lines, where are substations, where's load, where could we put a bunch of solar? So we're just starting to get through all that. But it would be nice to have Cleveland on board with us because the airport is physically located inside the city of Cleveland, and there's some substations we would like to get access to. So I'm hoping this evolves with the city of Cleveland, and the county utility is able to, co-develop, cooperatively work with them on projects. And we think we can also make them money. They're struggling utilities, so this could be a potential new profit center for them, or, revenue center for them. So we could, they could charge us a small microgrid fee, right? Or county microgrid service, that we could get them some revenue. Hoping we get there. We're not there yet.
Cool. Thank you. This just kind of drawing out like these very different situations, right, of like developing, and the situations of how do we interact with incumbent public power, with new public power institutions, how do we interact with incumbent IOUs, or, as you seem to be saying, as little as possible. So I want to shift, I think, to another sort of like area of this questioning, which is governance. And I know that in many ways, I think Pete, I'm sort of have some familiarity that like some of these questions aren't totally answered yet. But one of the big questions I think about larger scale public power institutions is how that scale affects some of the benefits that people talk about a lot with more local public power institutions, right? I think, we had Brandy Ekron from Traverse City Light and Power this morning really speaking to the fact that she's like, literally, I'm the general manager of the utility, and the people I talk to on the phone literally know where I live. Like they are down the street. Like if I screw up, it's very immediate, right? And there's a closeness, whether in a municipality, whether it's an appointed board or an elected one, there's a closeness there that I think many folks identify as a benefit and a value. And that smaller scale is one of the things that maybe contributes to much higher reliability numbers for municipal utilities, right? I think one of the questions, so like kind of like framing that out and connecting back to some of what we've talked about earlier in the day, like as these visions develop, what does the governance of these sort of differently scaled public power institutions look like? Does it look like a state level regulatory agency that people engage with much as they do now? Do these entities set rates? Do local entities set rates? Kind of who's in charge of what decisions, right, as these things evolve? And I guess, Pete, I'll kick it to you to share at least how you're engaging with these questions to start us off.
No, that's the as we have these conversations that there's anybody you bump to on the street in Northern California, you ask them, do you think that PG&E is doing a good job? They're like, no, terrible. Like, but the concept of like, what else? The folks start to be like, wait, but who would be in charge? Am I in charge of that? What does local mean? Does community mean that I have to decide where we get our energy? So what exists on paper with Golden State Energy, and this is not our vision, this is the hastily constructed, what was passed in 2020, is a 9-person board that would start as mostly appointed by the governor, a couple by the legislature, and then would transition to publicly elected statewide officials. So that's the stopgap that exists now, but that's certainly not our long-term vision of what we'd engage with. And as you said very well, Jackson, that and it was brought up in an earlier panel, I think yesterday, about the elected does not necessarily mean democratic, and especially given how cutthroat and how massively powerful the energy sector is here in California, and how just the scale of our elections. There is no way that a community-based energy expert or community leader would stand a chance against an industry-backed candidate at a statewide level. So, we are deep in engagement with those questions, and thinking about how do we make sure that are there like protected seats on the board for environmental justice communities, for fire survivors, folks with disabilities, other folks for the statewide entity, and recognizing that can we construct the statewide entity that has a sort of medium to long arc transition to actually prop up and help create much more local entities. Obviously, you mentioned the reliability and the personability scale, but the reactiveness, the sort of like sense of ownership that has so many benefits beyond just whether your lights turn on or not, but is about democracy and folks having ownership of their communities and taking care of one another. So there's a lot of ideas of how to construct that type of engagement, and we are deep in the process of asking folks. Part of what we're doing this fall, and Jackson, you've been involved in this, is having lots of conversations with folks across the country about what does good governance look like for the new utility model that breaks us out of just depending on the Wall Street model to decide what's good for our communities. And we know that it's not just going to be straight elected, straight people from the governor's office, in part because a lot of those folks at we know it's not going to be lined directly up with the California Public Utilities Commission, because those are governor appointed and legislature approved and have really done more than anyone to prevent this vision from happening, and have doubled down on sort of the beck and call of the IOUs. And so we know that we need new models, and we know that we want to seed the possibility of those in local communities. And so San Francisco will hopefully have its own decision-making model that does at least impact, if not fully hold rates, and certainly thinks about infrastructure and community engagement, and figuring out how that can happen in other communities, but also be interconnected in a way that we're not sort of siphoned off into our various corners. So that's a non-answer to point to, like, we are eager for digging into the conversations, and we identify as an environmental justice organization, and the principles of environmental justice include nobody speaking for our communities, folks being at the center and being in the decision-making process. So that's what we're in the process of building now.
Thanks, Pete. Mike, kick it over to you. I mean, you're working on this almost like thing that's been built out inside of the county government. Like, what does governance, management, decision making look like in this kind of interstitial model, kind of halfway between the local and the state?
Can you see my back wall? This is like this is how it all gets done right now. No, so it's. I mean, when we created the utility, it was look. We've got 11 county council people. Our county executive was all in. He said, "Yeah, fully, let's go do this." We went to county council, and we had about 9 months worth of hearings, right? And in order to get the council to kind of sign off on this. And there were some who were all really gung-ho, right? Others who were pretty grumpy about it, and some in between. When you're a county government, this isn't something that people think about all the time. They think about health and human services. They think about public works in terms of roads and bridges, jails, justice services. Energy and electricity isn't something they think about right off the bat, or even utility work, especially electric utility work. So this is kind of a new concept, and so it's been kind of, all right, fully, we're going to give you some leeway, go, but you're going to have to bring back to us kind of, when you've got projects, you got to bring them to us for approval. As you create a governance structure, we want you to bring it back for approval. So right now we're hiring a utility operator who's going to be operating this stuff on our behalf. By the way, our counties, they're progressive, but they're also risk averse, right? So, we want to minimize the amount of output or risk that the county is going to see, especially for this weird thing that we're doing, which is this new county utility. So I don't know that we're thinking through this model. We're going to be using a lot of private dollars to begin with, right? So we'll have a utility operator who will be hiring someone to go do maintenance, to install panels, and working with our building trades to install solar panels to get access to the transmission grid. Right now, it'll be hiring third-party subcontractors to do that work because we don't have that capacity or competency. Hopefully 5 years down the line, we do. We'll be doing the billing. We'll be doing all the maintenance. We'll be doing the installing. It'll be more of a kind of a traditional utility where government and government employees are kind of working on this stuff, getting government salaries and government pensions and all that stuff. But at least at the beginning, we're having to rely on kind of other people's money and third-party kind of contractors to do the work. So we're kind of creating this model as we go, but that's the goal, is that at some point we're working towards our county government doing this work with a kind of a embedded workforce to do it. And I should say that so we are using for these first 3 sets of projects, there's going to be a bunch of private equity money in this, which makes me nervous, but we've kind of put some guardrails around it, right? And so it's got to have this amount of renewable energy. It's got to have these DEI requirements. It's got to be in these neighborhoods. We also, Senator Brown, as I said, has given us some money to do a lot of design work. So hopefully we're putting guardrails down that work, and that we're going to keep kind of tight oversight on. Eventually, as we build this stuff out, we bring that stuff in house, I hope.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too dissimilar. We were hearing a little bit about the main effort, which, as I understand, the proposal is similarly establishing the governance and state control over everything, and largely contracting out operations, at least in the initial phase of things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think like just lifting up kind of like the building these institutions, and they have to sort of live and work within the surrounding economic conditions, and they have to create the conditions where they can grow and thrive from there.
I'll just add a tiny piece to that. Is the question of labor is something that we wrestle with consistently, or are deeply engaged with, and then folks often ask us like, but what's going to happen to the workers, or what? How do folks who are actually operating the system right now fit into this? And so the structure of Golden State Energy is such that it would actually become a state entity that would be about 100 people just managing the institution, and then the corpus of PG&E's staff and operations would be managed, become a B corporation, and then that state institution would manage that B corporation, which would allow that. There's a funny rule here that we bumped into like trouble with our friends in labor about being worried about the transition of seniority and benefits and those types of things, and bumped up against some IBEW folks who have said not over our dead pensions, you're not going to do this. So we've structured it so those benefits remain, and that we know that the current everything that we say, that the current operators of the system and the future ones are good, life affirming, safe, and union jobs.
Yeah, because if you don't solve those questions, they kill everything, right? I mean, then there's a whole bunch of kind of, I don't know if drama is the right word, but it's just, those are things that it will kill a project or kill a campaign.
Totally. Right.
You should figure those things out.
Yeah.
I am so deeply fascinated by all this, and just want to thank y'all for taking the time to be here. We've got a few more minutes, but I wanted to shift to asking a question we've pretty much been asking everyone who's spoken one way or another of, as you were looking at sort of like what conditions would allow your the work you're doing to grow, succeed, and thrive. what sorts of action from your state governments, from the federal government, from advocates and allies, what sort of structural changes and policy shifts would enable things to grow and succeed and move forward? I'll let whoever wants to take that one first.
Well, I know from us, it's like, so First Energy owns the transmission lines, and they own a lot of the substations, and would be helpful to us if there were just explicit federal rules around, hey, you've got to cooperate with any municipality, any muni utility, any startup muni utility, allow them access, give them, assistance, help, not put up roadblocks, because we just know that those are things that we're going to have to be fighting soon. We're not sure what all the fights we're going to have with them yet, but I would like some sort of explicit acknowledgement that munis have as much right to get on the, to take power off the grid as anybody else, and that we should be assisted and profited from the larger transmission grid. I mean, that's the stuff that literally keeps me up at night. Is just getting, when we need to get access to the transmission grid, and these fights we're going to have with First Energy. We'll get through them, but gosh, I just want them to be easier than what I know they're not going to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really appreciate the question, Jackson, and I think there's lots of bits and pieces, and I should name Shana and Nanavati from our staff that they're not able to be here, but they've got a lot more of the technical knowledge of what it takes to get from here to there, and you can name a number of things about allowing multi-parcel microgrids and funding community solar in a way that is actually community and advancing other pieces that can improve the experience of moving towards a more just energy system. But we're very clear that we're call ourselves IOU abolitionists, and actually wanting to get rid of the concept of the investor-owned utility. So each of those pieces, if we're not advancing that goal as we're making each of those pieces, the small adjustments, and we're not pointing to the big goal, then we're actually sort of maintaining the length and power of an entity that should not exist. And so in terms of what we would need from political officials, from the folks who have their hands on the gears, is just a sense of courage and possibility. And part of the reason that I pushed us to start taking this up as Golden State Energy is that waving the flag. Short anecdote here. Great legislator from the North Country, fire impacted area, very vocal against PG&E, wanted to do something, wanted to author legislation to challenge PG&E, looked at the shelf of what's available and didn't see an alternative. And so what he chose to do was well, we want to do something to make people safer. Let's go with undergrounding, and let's go have PG&E force them and other utilities to bury tens of thousands of miles of line. It is the slowest, costliest, in some ways least impactful, and most environmentally disruptive way to ensure safety, and pulls so much energy away from the actual conversation. So we ended up having one of our strongest leaders leading the charge to basically a boondoggle profit for PG&E. Every foot of line they put underground, they make money from, and they're happy to do that, as opposed to breaking apart and bringing people into the process. And so had we had something on the shelf, and had he had the political courage to say, there is another solution, you can do it right now, all you got to do is stand up to the gremlin that has been causing us so much pain, we'd be in a very different situation now. And that's what we're trying to do now, is create the sense of possibility and the space for courage to put something on the desk of those who are going to make these decisions. And then we can all make the decisions together about how our power interacts in our lives.
Awesome. Well, we have a few minutes left here. Appreciate y'all bringing those thoughts and visions together. I want to take a moment and maybe Liz, we can just give people access. I know I haven't seen much in chat, but if there's anyone who wants to ask a question verbally, who's having trouble with the chat right now, just put a hand up. Would love to make a little space if we want to get an audience question or two in, for anyone who's not able to do that over the chat. I'll just give folks a minute there.
Yeah, can I say, like, one of the reasons this is so hard is it's so damn complicated, right? You've got you've got distribution networks, transmission grids, you've got billing, no one understands their electric bill, right? You've got different sources of generation. It's complicated stuff. Utilities. It shouldn't be that hard is one of the things. It's like one of the things I think has been designed into the system in order to minimize public engagement or public interest. And it's so hard to do, right? In a lot of respects.
I mean, I'm eager for other folks' questions to chime in, but I agree. And Mike, I'm actually interested in you came in as a legislator, and like, what made you think it was possible to wrap your mind around this stuff? And I also was really moved by something that Jackson, you and Isaac said yesterday about something about the like needing to get achieve the level of understanding that we can follow, that we know we can follow through on our promises or something like that. So I don't know anything about energy. I came out of racial and economic justice organizing and see this as an opportunity of, this is a way to improve people's lives. And so we try and move at a level that is like bringing people into the process and having enough understanding to recognize what needs to change, and then try and add the technological pieces because there's no future where everybody who benefits from this energy system knows every piece about it, but we can have a future where folks have a trust and an ownership and the backstops and the democracy in place and the fail safes in place to make sure that we're taking care of each other and not extracting from one another and the earth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll offer the way I feel about the energy system is it's very, very complicated, and it's also very simple. In the sense that I think, to lift up another thing that, that Isaac raised in the initial session is that it's like at a certain point, you just decide what the goals are, and then you tell the smart engineers, engineer around those goals, right? Not every ratepayer needs to be an electrical engineer, but the people who are electrical engineers, if they're engineering with the social goals of affordability, climate adaptation, et cetera, in mind, and there's accountability to the people who are, to the people who are going to be impacted by that, then yeah, the actual technical solutions and the structures of management and how you do bills and money and everything, there's a lot of complexity when you get into actually operating things. But it's important to, I think, as we kind of talked about, this actually came up in like Q&A session, right? That the complexity is not a reason to forget, and is often used as an excuse to forget the simple part of it, which is whose interests are being put first, right? And we need a system that puts the interests of society and the people who have been historically harmed first, and then ask the technical questions with that as the driving force. And I just want to say also, like, I really want to like name something about like our participation in this convening is that we've had a tremendous number of folks who are advocates, campaign members, right? Some folks who are technical experts in one regard or another, and many folks who are like, I know how to rally people and build movement, right? Who have been like digging into these sort of wonky questions of like, how do we actually manage this stuff? So just want to say this has been like all the conversations and the cross-cutting expertises, right? From like power building to actually building projects, right? Has been really, really excellent. And I want to offer, it seems like some people just have kind of popped on. So I'm going to say, I'm going to let Jay get the last question, I think. And I don't know if someone else was coming on camera to ask a question, but I'll have Jay ask a question. Yeah, Jay, jump in.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how to make this a question, but I just wanted to what you were just saying about, kind of it's about the vision that is put forward, and the fact that if we can bring this thing to people at a level that really talks about what the opportunity is here with the technology that we do have available, people do understand, I think, solar energy is something very, very special. And how we're going to use that and how it's going to create the greatest public benefit and the least harm is got to be where we start. And I think that's what I'm taking away from this conference, I think, and all the amazing work that's been going on. So I just want to express appreciation on that level. And we're working here in San Diego and looking about concentrating now on the distribution system and understanding that we can, at least in San Diego, we already have the studies. We know we can power this place with what we got incident here and with the technology we got. And that's where we're going to go. So I just wanted to express that and thank you again.
Mike and Pete, we're kind of at time, but any final words you want to share? You're getting you're the last panelist to the conference, so you get the final word here.
Well, just sending an enormous amount of gratitude for the folks who have set this up, and I think that lesson about we can push hard for public institutions, capital P, but if we're not actually doing the work to build the movement and the infrastructure and the social infrastructure to hold them accountable and put the vision of the world that we want at the center and to tear away the oppressive systems that have gotten us here, then we're doing a disservice. I fear us replicating the systems we've put in place, and I know that we can build new ones. And so that's why I'm in this work and grateful to be doing it with you all.
And I appreciate that, Pete and Jackson. And I think this stuff, especially around utilities, is everyone pays a utility bill, right? Everyone's invested in kind of what the network, what the system is, what the importance of kind of the utility structure exists in this country, and so I think we're at potentially a right moment, right? That where there's a lot of good organizing work going on. You guys are doing good stuff, but also there's an opportunity, I think, to take advantage of right now, both with climate change, the kind of ineptness, or I don't know if ineptness is the right word, but corruptness of the investor-owned utilities that exist. So I think there's something gelling here, hopefully, that folks can raw material here to take advantage of to really make positive change. So I appreciate the work you guys are doing.
Thanks so much, y'all. And with that, thank you to our panelists. And Eric, I'm kicking it back to you to just send us into. We're gonna have some final time for breakout conversations based on yesterday. We might do them a little shorter, but we'll have some final time for some breakouts to process everything, and then we'll be closing. So, Eric, passing it back.
Absolutely, and thank you guys for giving your perspectives on your municipalization fights there. For these breakouts, they're going to be pretty straightforward. We've got a breakout room for policy for public power. If you're interested in hashing out some more of these like state or federal policies that we may need, or the issues around like what have you encountered and how did you work through it, that's going to be the room for you. Organizing for public power. If you want to talk more about the organizing fight, the groundwork, and like how to educate your community, that one's going to be for you. And if you'd like to just sit and meet with some of the speakers or some of the participants today, we've also got a general networking room. Liz will be opening those up for you shortly, and you can pick your room. Jackson, myself, and Colin will be hopping in those to help mediate.
Yeah, and you can get in those right now. They're open.
Yeah. And as and as Jackson was saying, yesterday we gave them an hour. We're going to tentatively give them 45 minutes. So if we can reconvene at 5:05, there we go.
Cool. And everyone can hop into those breakouts. And just again, if you're having trouble like figuring out how to choose one, you can just drop it in the chat, and me or Liz will move you into the breakout you need to go to. Looks like folks are figuring it out. Liz, are you good to hang out here and just make sure folks find their way?
Yep.
Very good. Thank you.